thank you very much for being with us. Brave Shakatai. Appreciate it. Have a good.
So, in their own words, as I said, in their own words, this is how they're making money on human capital. I don't know if you're aware of it, but recently the Department of Justice has decided to review their contracts with private prisons and to end their contracts with private prisons. This is a lot due to the lobby of the abolitionists and showing these things across the country and explaining it to educators and lawyers and professors that we're dealing with this problem right here. As I said earlier, they made a transfer of ownership. At one point, as a matter of fact, let me read a quote to you that will help explain it a little bit better. It's a letter that was written to Stevens from Abraham Lincoln. And it says, "You think slavery is right and ought to be extended." Now this is Lincoln speaking, by the way. You think slavery is right and ought to be extended, while we think it is wrong and ought to be restricted. He didn't say ended, he said restricted. That, I suppose, is the rub. It is certainly the only substantial difference between us. See, at the time, Lincoln was a lawyer. He was dealing with uprisings all across the South. Slavery uprisings like the Nat Turner Rebellion, and the world itself had already begun to abolish slavery. Europe had abolished slavery. America was the last bastion left. And they were frowning upon what was going on here. The whole world had turned against the United States. So Lincoln was looking for a way out, but he didn't want to end slavery. The South would not allow it. As you well know, they went to war to keep it going. So what was the answer? The answer was to turn it into prisons, start using what had been pioneered by the state of Vermont, and even as far back as Alabama and Ohio. Alabama and Ohio were among the first to introduce an exception clause into their state constitutions. And in 1777, Vermont also put an exception clause into their state constitution. Right here in the state of North Carolina, today, your state constitution says this. North Carolina State Constitution, Article 1, Declaration of Rights, Section 17, slavery and involuntary servitude. Slavery is forever prohibited. Sounds real nice, right? And then it goes on to say involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, whereof the parties have been adjudged guilty, is forever prohibited. That forever prohibited makes you think it ended. But right inside it says involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the parties have been adjudged guilty. So involuntary servitude is legal right now. We're right here where we're standing. Many states adopted those same things. The one that I mentioned earlier was Vermont. I want to read Vermont's constitution to you as well, because they kind of set the precedence of how it should be. Just give me a second here. It's some of the most incredible verbiage you will ever hear in regards to a state constitution. That is, if I can find it. I'll get to it in a minute. In the meantime, what it says in the Vermont state constitution is very similar to what you just heard in the North Carolina state constitution, that slavery shall be abolished except for prisoners duly convicted. But in Vermont, it also said, except also if you are in debt. If you owe somebody a debt, you can be enslaved. And then finally it says, and the like. So whatever and the like means is beyond my understanding. But apparently it leaves the door wide open for anybody that they want to make a slave into a slave. Now how is Vermont existing today because of that? Today in Vermont, 1.2% of the population is African American. It's basically a white state, like 98% white people in Vermont. But let me tell you what's happening in the prisons in Vermont. In Vermont today, African Americans are being incarcerated at a rate of 12 to 1. For every one white person in this 98% white state, there are 12 African Americans in this 1.2% population who are going to prisons and jails. That is not even mathematically possible. I don't even know how they could possibly be doing that. at unless they're surrounding the black community, criminalizing it, and then treating it like some kind of shopping mart for human bodies, where they're going in and getting your children and taking them out and putting them in these prisons.
Right.
When they put them into these prisons, you would be, it's going to blow your mind to know how much it costs to incarcerate a child in the United States of America. Are we familiar here all with Khalif Browder and the story of Khalif Browder? Anybody not familiar with Khalif Browder? Okay. Khalif Browder in New York was a 16-year-old boy who was walking home a few days before his 17th birthday with a friend. He was stopped by the police and accused of robbing a backpack. It was his backpack. Accused of robbing someone's backpack. They put him into an adult prison by the name of Rikers Island. The infamous Rikers Island at 16 years old, where he spent 3 years in there without being charged, without having a trial, without nothing happened except that he was incarcerated for 3 straight years. There's this video that has come out of him being abused by the guard, him being abused by the inmates, and just really living a life of living hell. He spent over a year, that is 3 years, in solitary confinement. And solitary confinement is torture. According to the UN's own documents, that is torture. They released him after 3 years without so much as an apology. It didn't explain why he was arrested, didn't explain why he spent 3 years in an adult prison without ever being charged or receiving a trial. Just kind of dumped him out. Within 2 years, he committed suicide. Killed himself, 22 years old. His mother died 2 weeks ago of a broken heart. Literally, 2 weeks ago of a broken heart. Khalif Browder. Khalif Browder. And this is a very recent circumstance. Now, why would they do that to Khalif Browder? I can explain to you why they would do that. Because in New York, to incarcerate one child for 1 year is $353,000. I didn't stutter. It's not a mistake. To incarcerate a single child in New York State in a private facility, like Rikers Island, is $353,000 a year. What could you do with $353,000? I have a list here of some research we've done through New Abolitionist Radio, and this is called The Incarceration Nation in Black and White. It shows how much, what the percentage of black versus white incarceration state by state is going on. I want to also show you another document that we did research on called The Cost of Living. If I can find out how to close this thing. So you can see state by state what it costs to, can you see that? You know, my shadow. These are the prices that each state's paid to incarcerate a teenager. Louisiana is $46,662. That is the fast food restaurant of slavery in this nation. It's like McDonald's. They're the cheapest. $46,662 for 1 year. That is more money than I make in a year. It's more money than most people I know make in a year to incarcerate one child. And that's the cheapest. As you can see, it goes down and the prices increase. Beyond imagining. 100,000. Colorado, 104,000. Nebraska, 126,000. Nevada, 130,000. West Virginia, 141,000. On and on. South Carolina, 155,000. North Carolina, $160,000 to incarcerate a teenager for 1 single year. It doesn't end there. It goes all the way down to New York, $353,000 a year. This is a bounty on your children's heads. This is the reason why a cop can walk up to your child and grab him and accuse him of anything like they did Khalif Browder and put him into a prison, because this generates a huge amount of money. And this is happening all over America. These are the private facilities that incarcerate our children for the most ridiculous of reasons, whether it be for petty possession, as I mentioned early on in this discussion, or it could even be something like probation violation. 353,000. Maine, 224,000. This is information that most people don't know. They have no idea. And guess who's paying that cost? Guess where it comes from? From you. That's right. You're paying for the incarceration of your own children at these rates, right here. Khalid Browder earned that prison almost $1 million for 3 years. He was just an asset, an expendable asset. They didn't give a damn whether he was brutalized. They didn't care if he killed himself afterwards. All that mattered was he generated $1 million while he was in it, more than $1 million. We found, as I said, through the incarceration nation in black and white, that there is not a state in this union where African Americans are not incarcerated at a much higher rate than their counterparts within the same states. Examples would be Alabama. Alabama, the population is 736,000, or 736,000. The white population represents 66.9%. The black population represents 26.7%. The whites are incarcerated per 100,000 at 542, and blacks are incarcerated per 100,000 at 1,916 in Alabama. You make up less than 30% of the population, and yet you have triple the incarceration, 3.5 times the amount of your white counterparts. In places like Alaska, like black people live in Alaska? Yes, black people live in Alaska. In Alaska, total population is 736,000, 66.9% white. Black is 3.9%. Incarceration rates for whites is 500 per 100,000, and for blacks, 2,163. Some of the worst places that you can find would be, another example would be Iowa. Again, Iowa, right? Like you think Iowa, you don't think black population. It's a very small black population in Iowa. Iowa's population is 1,654,930. Whites are arrested and incarcerated, or whites make up 93.5% of the population. So basically a white state. Blacks make up 0.8%. Very small part of the population. And yet, whites are incarcerated at 675 per 100,000, and blacks are incarcerated at 2,869 per 100,000 in Iowa. Yeah, it is a wild moment, because these are the things that people don't understand. They don't know, and you need to know. And it's all for the same reason it was in 1860. It's all about slavery and human trafficking. Some of these prisons, like this one we just heard about on that video, have contracts with the states. These contracts last up to 25 years and guarantee anything from 80 to 100% occupancy at all times. And if they are not filled at all times, then they are, the state is charged what is called a low crime tax. Meaning that you, as a citizen, have to pay for any empty beds that are not filled by human bodies going into these states. And it even gets worse. In a state like Arizona, it's much worse. There are at least 3 prisons in Arizona that guarantee 100% occupancy for the next 25 years. How can you guarantee that a prison is going to be filled for 25 years straight at 100% occupancy?
Yep, guaranteed.
That your government has in these private prisons. There is another prison in Arizona by the name of Eloy. Eloy is a special kind of prison, and it's a perfect example of human trafficking. If you live in the state of Hawaii and you are arrested in Hawaii, they will ship you from Hawaii to Arizona to go into this prison by the name of Eloy that only houses Hawaiians. You didn't do anything in Arizona? What the hell are you doing in Arizona in a prison? It's because they're guaranteed 100% occupancy, and these are the ways that they fill them. So they ship bodies from one state to another state to fill up these prisons. And they don't just do it for the money, they also do it for gerrymandering. We know about that already, where they can take these prisoners, black prisoners, and say, look, we have a black population of 3,000 or 5,000 when 80 or 90% of them are prisoners. These are dirty deeds going on right before our eyes. We have been dealing with a lot of issues throughout this history of the United States of America. One of the biggest issues that we seem to fail to be able to recognize, let alone address, is the issue of modern slavery and human trafficking. I spent some time, and I looked around this room, for example, of all the issues that are going on here, and I don't see slavery in it. So that must mean that the people who put this together, or the people that are here today, or somebody somewhere, doesn't recognize slavery as a thing that has occurred. If I can come with a policeman and snatch your children off the street and put them in a prison for $353,000 a year, hold them there, never charge them with anything, and then let them go, what is that? If it's not slavery, you're hunting people in the streets. As I mentioned earlier, last year alone, every 25 seconds, someone was arrested for marijuana possession. Marijuana possession every 25 seconds. Because of that study, the ACLU is now demanding, they're not asking, they're demanding that the government ease laws on possession, that they stop charging people with minor possession charges, because it's filling these prisons up to the brim. And it's not just possession charges that are doing it. We found that because of the incentives that are being put on the table in order for these people to cause more arrests, that other circumstances are arising. For instance, a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, in Massachusetts, there was a story about a woman by the name of Annie Dukin. Anyone here heard of Annie Dukin? Annie Dukin was a crime lab technician. She was, crime lab technician. She was involved in an incentive program that exists in at least 14 states in this union, where the prison industry pays the lab technicians extra money, whether to them personally or to the department, for every positive drug or alcohol result that they provide. So for 10 years, this woman was falsifying drug results, turning them into positive, which sent as many as 60,000 people to prison or jail, or cost them in some way, somehow, their livelihoods. 60,000, one woman. 14 states are doing it. She spent 2 years in prison. She just got out of prison. She ruined over 60,000 lives. She spent 2 years in prison, and she's walking free right now. This system of incentives to call for crime lab technicians to be able to give these positive results has not even been addressed. Nobody's been charged. It gets even worse than that. There are more incentives. There's a company by the name of Merkel that existed in Pennsylvania. It's a private prison company. They have these wonderful little juvenile detention facilities with these great little names like Pennsylvania Child Care. Make you think it's a place where you want to take your grandchildren to visit. You know, hey, I got to go to the movie. Can Pennsylvania Child Care take care of my kids for me? Yes, they can take care of your kids, all right. What happens there is beyond belief. 2 judges pled guilty to selling as many as 5,000 children to this private prison. They ended up receiving 28 years in prison. I'm going to show you a clip of this video, as a matter of fact, so you can see it in detail, those who are not aware. They ended up being charged and receiving 28 years in prison. The company, Merkel, who initiated all this and was paying them as much as $2 million in kickbacks per year, was never charged with anything. They made almost $1 billion on these transactions of selling children to these private prisons, and were fined $80 million. Better to ask forgiveness than permission, right? I mean, you do something so criminal that you make $1 billion, and your punishment is to give back 10%. The company has said not a single official has ever been charged. I want to play that video for you now.
You should.
So you can see it with your own eyes. This story has a documentary, and it's called Kids
over
or
2
Cash.
million people in jail. The US has the world's biggest prison population, but some of them are seeing the inside of a cell because dodgy judges are getting payback from the private sector. RT's Guy Chichikang reports on those dishing out justice for a fee.
2 Pennsylvania judges have made a killing out of juvenile prisons. Mark Chivarella and Michael Conahan were convicted of receiving kickbacks for more than $2 million from the developers of several private detention centers. But the real crime, according to parents, is that these judges then sent more than 5,000 children to those very facilities for crimes as small as fighting on a school bus or posting a parody of their teacher on the web.
My kid's not here. He's dead. Because of him. He ruined my life. Do you remember me? Do you remember my son? And I'll start last one. He's good. He's shot himself in the heart.
Sandy Fonzo's 17-year-old son, Edward, was a budding student and sportsman when he was arrested at an underage party. Judge Chivarella locked him up for 6 months. Shortly after he got out, Edward committed suicide.
He never looked into, the whole picture of the kids. Like I said, he lined them up one by one and he sent them away, shackled them, sent them to places that, God knows what went on, and then he throws them back. And how does a kid deal with that? My son just never recovered from it.
Eric Stefanski was 12 when Judge Chivarella sent him to jail for 2 years for scratching his mom's car while joyriding. Or this young man, who was a teenager, was locked up for months for throwing a piece of steak at his mom's boyfriend.
I couldn't believe that being accused of something like throwing steak was all that was needed to be put away.
The case of the 2 Pennsylvania judges in bed with local private prisons could be just the tip of the iceberg. A recent report revealed America's largest prison corporations pour hundreds of thousands into the campaigns of governors, state legislators, and judges in the hope of advancing their agenda. And it seems to be working. The number of private prisons in the U.S. is growing rapidly.
All of their money, every penny they get is a taxpayer dollar that they get from the government. And so what they do is they get the money from the government to house prisoners, then they turn around and spend some of that money by giving it back to the politicians that push the laws and the policies that lead to both more people being incarcerated, more people being incarcerated in private prisons.